Thank you, everybody, for coming to this webinar. This is the Vielight Expert Series, and the topic of today is photobiomodulation for athletic trainers. So today we'll be exploring the impact of PBM neurotechnology on athletic performance and recovery. So before we get started, just a quick disclaimer here. I won't go through and read it, but you can take a quick read of that. So I'll leave this up. Okay. And if you didn't get a chance to read that, this webinar will be recorded, so you'll be able to read it fully again. So to go over the logistics for today's session, attendees are in a listen-only mode. So if you'd like to ask questions, you can raise your hand or submit it through the Q&A. We welcome the Q&A first because we will be monitoring that actively. This webinar will be recorded for future on-demand playback. And so we hope to have the recordings over to you following the webinar. So please feel free to share your comments on social media. We welcome them on Twitter or X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And so the moderator for today's session is Peter Adams. He's the Vice President of Vielight. And so now I'll hand it over to Peter.
Hey, thanks, Austin. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Today, we're very happy to have our second expert series presentation or gathering. The reason we created the expert series is in the history of Vielight over the last 10 years, we've enjoyed an enormous amount of supportive research from institutions all over the world. And the amount of information that's come in, both traditionally and then anecdotally, is enormous. So to actually facilitate understanding of how to use this technology in different forms, we created the expert series. And the first one, some of you may have joined it, was focused on TBI. And we're very grateful for having Drs. Elizabeth Wild and Essa Penko from the universities of Utah and Mount Sinai in New York make that presentation of the results of their study. Now, going through those studies, we were focused on, let's call it fixing disease or generating wellness. Out of those came a whole bunch of performance outputs, which came in week after week, month after month. And it attracted interest from elite athletes, aging athletes, senior athletes, bringing this to us. So we've spent quite a while really just trying to synthesize all this information. And that's why I'm really excited today to have some of those athletes, experts, and trainers who have been on the journey with us since then. And at the top, we have, you can see at the top of your screen there, Gilberto Gonzalez. And I see again, Gilberto is an expert trainer, very much focused in the mental aspects of training. And he's in Miami. Many of you may have seen him, but some of you not. One of the things I know about Gilberto is as I've grown to know him over the last few months, he is very humble. And he reminds me of one of those secret restaurants that you actually find in a city, but you'll only find that if you know somebody. It might not even have a sign on the door, but when you go in there, you know that there is top-class food every day created by best chefs in the world. And that's what reminds me of Gilberto. He's very humble, but he hides his experience, his reach of people he trains. He trains world-class professional tennis players, UFC fighters, from athletes. He also works with very young athletes who have mental issues. And then below him, on the picture there, is Dr. Larry Carr. Larry Carr, his journey started, he was a BYU Hall of Famer. And he actually was in the Hall of Fame for creating a record for the most tackles. And that was in the 70s. And that record hasn't been broken as a defensive tackle. Larry had a serious head injury. He has a PhD in sports physiology. He became a professor, but his injuries caused him to have real trouble in his life, and it ruined his career. Now, this man took that experience and worked with photobiomodulation to regain his life, and he's really turned that tragedy into something quite remarkable with the work he's done at the universities of Utah and Brigham Young University, and he's going to share that with you today. And then on the other side, just below him, last but not least, and more important in terms of our guest presenters, we have Karl Zawicki. He's 10x world champion in in triathlons, in Xterra triathlons. But the one thing, he's also, by the way, a published researcher, and he's a data junkie and very experienced at monitoring. And I think we're also going to award him the title of the longest using athlete using Vielight. We discovered that he'd been using it 10 years ago, and he's used this technology a long time, so he knows a lot about it. Those are the presenters. And then down at the bottom there, we have Dr. Lou Lim. Dr. Lim is the founder and CEO, inventor of Vielight, and he will be available in the question period at the end to mop up all of the technical questions that you may have. So we're going to cover a little bit of the basics about PBM, not knowing our audience and the level of knowledge you have about this subject. And then these guys will give us the latest insights on mental fitness, some of the myths, and how to integrate this into your daily practice. So these are our guys, as you can see. There, you can see that was Larry looking really handsome in the past, and there's Calvin winning, and there's Gilberto in his Dynasty lab. Just a quick note, our informed research, one of the things about Vielight is we don't pay for any advertising. We use only earned media, and we do not pay for endorsement either. Now, we have this ambassador program, and what we're doing is we're working with elite athletes who it's really a partnership to understand their needs. And in return, every time we come out with the latest release of technology, we give it to them, and we have a formal process for getting feedback. As you can see, we have Team USA Paralympics, we have skiing, yoga, we have UFC fighters, we have NFL, NHL players who are all using this technology. We do encourage you, if you're interested, if you are an athlete, to reach out if you'd like to join the ambassador program and join that kind of feedback process. That would be great. So sports performance, where did this all come from? This is the lens that we're looking at from sports performance, which is essentially running from strength to recovery, cognitive function, mental health and wellness, and sleep. So as you all know, this breaks down into many categories of subcategories of things that are measurable. Now, these discoveries of the effect of PBM in these areas, like I said, they come from anecdotal through to case studies, through to formal research. And what we wanted to do today is to try to get our team here, our three experts, just to share with you how they've been using the technology and what they've noticed in these categories. We're not going to cover them all, but I promise you, if you have interest, there will be a video. If you want to form questions, yes, we can answer on this particular forum as much as we can, but then please feel free to write into info@vielight.com. And navigating Vielight research is kind of complicated. If you just do it starting from scratch, we can guide you. There are tons of links to various research on these subjects. So what is PBM and where does it come from? Well, the research started in 1997, sort of formal research showing outputs. But as you can see, the interest, which has been driven by the results it's generated, has accelerated up to 5,000 published studies. Now, these studies aren't just, the quality of the studies is really high. I mean, we have stuff in the Lancet covering many aspects, whether it's from panels to different frequencies of light. And the quality of these research has been generated by some of the top researchers in the world. One of the founders was Dr. Margaret Nazars and Dr. Hamlin at Harvard and Boston University Hospital, neuroscientists. And then the next generation of research, Dr. Larry Carr, who was a physiology expert, has actually promoted the idea of this research and actually encouraged the University of Utah, some of their younger researchers, to spawn this off. We call this the second gen, but this is really accelerated with Dr. Elizabeth Wild's group. There are up to 20 researchers over there now working specifically on photobiomodulation, transcranial photobiomodulation. It's also coming now that the interest has sort of grown pretty much worldwide, and the Wall Street Journal came to us to write about it. They wrote about beds. They wrote about transcranial photobiomodulation. So the effects are becoming known around the world and legitimized. So let's just focus on what we're talking about today. Many of you may be using light beds, which are using 633 nanometer regular red light. Some of you may be using near infrared. The Vielight products that have been used in the research studies that our experts are talking about today are specifically intranasal, which is the Vielight patented nasal device, which uses two frequencies of light, a 633 nanometer and 655 nanometer red. The 655 is laser. And then the transcranial, which is a combination of a headset and the intranasal, is using pulse near infrared. The idea of pulse near infrared is if you want a device for sport, most sport people are traveling, you can't carry a bed with you. You want something that's going to have a powerful effect. It needs to be mobile, easy to use, and you just switch it on or switch it off. So that's the near infrared also gives you the combination of enough energy going directly into the brain. And just so you know, these devices are using custom diodes, which actually are in contact with the head, which Lou can show you later on, our latest device that's coming out. They're custom diodes which deliver enough power at the right frequency to generate the results which have been being experienced. And this is a shot of our latest device. We've done a lot on ergonomics and comfort, but this is our latest device, which is spoken specifically for the sports market. This is the Neuro 4, which pulses at a selectable 10 hertz, which is in the alpha band, and 40 hertz in the gamma band. And these guys can talk a little bit about that later on. So without further ado, that's enough for me. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to Dr. Larry Carr. And Larry's background, I think I've mentioned before. You can read it here. I'm not expecting all of you to read it, but there will be a video and you can go through his background. We're really pleased to have him. Larry, over to you, and tell us about your journey and what you've discovered and what it means to the field.
Thank you, Peter. Next slide, please. I love this slide, and I'll tell you why. Number one, I can see that at 230 pounds, I had a flat stomach at one point. So I know that's possible. It also reminds me of how much I love football. I love the sport of football. I had a difficult childhood. Football gave me a sense of accomplishment. It allowed me to succeed at something that not everybody was able to, and it brought me great joy. In the lower corner there, that's a picture of my favorite coach, Fred Whittingham. He was probably the brightest mind in football at the time. He's no longer with us. He was a boxer and played in the NFL. Toughest guy I've ever known. But he taught me how to play with my mind. He helped me to use my intelligence to know what I was doing on the field. He allowed me to be far more successful than I really had a right to be. I was barely 6 feet tall. I was maybe one of the slowest linebackers in BYU history. And so I depended on my mind. And that's what's so appropriate for this webinar. To separate physical performance and mental performance and processing and the likes is just not possible. They're one and the same. And you have to be at the top of your game. The upper slide there picture, that one reminds me of all my teammates, the camaraderie that we had. It reminds me of a good friend that I played with that ended his life 2 years ago. Only 1 week before we were recruiting him to be in our study. Reminds me of another linebacker friend who's been through 3 divorces and is homeless now, living in his car. Another one that played defensive end who is in a care facility and has been there for several years. This is serious stuff. I love the game. I don't support doing away with the game, but I understand the people that are. It's a violent game, and for as much joy that it brought me, it also brought me a lot of pain. this is my journey. And you can see down on the bottom, it says 1970 is when I started at BYU. You can extend that down to 1960, maybe even in the 50s, because my journey started with Pop Warner football. It started with junior high school, and then at BYU. BYU, any college athlete that comes in there is not fresh, clean, pristine brain. They've been playing for 10 years. And there's research out there that shows that there's disruption in the white matter after 1 year of youth football. So these guys are not their best selves when they come to you in college. But I played at BYU, played in the CFL for a couple of years. After that, I went back to school to get my degree. My deterioration, I guess, in behavior started early, probably around 2000, 1990s. I slowly was becoming somebody my wife didn't recognize. Eventually, she convinced me to go and get tested. And so I spent about 10 hours being tested by a neuropsychologist, and I was diagnosed with brain damage, significant brain damage. And this was before this was popular. In fact, I was surprised that he did diagnose that. Anyways, I continued to deteriorate, and my marriage was being threatened. My life was being threatened. I didn't want to go on until about 1915, 1916. I decided I had to retire because I just couldn't take the day-to-day. In 1916, my wife retired, and she suggested that we go on a mission for our church. And she chose Boston. I didn't have anything to do with that. So we went to Boston thinking that a change of venue, doing something good would help me, would make me feel better. Well, it didn't. In fact, it got worse, and we were thinking of coming home early. So being in Boston, I realized that that's the center of CTE research. I contacted Ann McKee, Dr. McKee. She graciously met with us. We spent about an hour and a half with us. She was very, very nice, very dedicated to what she's doing. I was surprised she took the time. But afterwards, when it's all said and done, she had nothing for us, nothing. We left her office with no hope. She did refer me to Dr. Stearns and Dr. Cantu, some few names that you're probably familiar with. Went and spent an hour, 2 hours with each of them. Again, left without any hope. I was going downhill. I didn't know how I could continue, to be quite frank. After another month or two, I, out of desperation, emailed Ann McKee again, begging her for something. At this point in time, she referred me to a colleague of hers that was doing research with using light at the Boston VA. She was working with Gulf War veterans and was seeing some success with it, and she recommended that I contact her. That's Dr. Nazer, who's in our audience today. So I went and visited Dr. Nazer with my wife on the 12th floor of the Boston VA in this little cluttered office. And she went through what she does. She went through the physiology, the mechanics of PBM, and I had never heard of it. I was very intrigued. I knew the physiology behind it. It sounded reasonable. So I agreed to be in it. And I didn't have a lot of hope. I was very pessimistic about the whole thing, shining light through my head. Come on. I just didn't know. Picture of me on the right. I then came into the Boston VA three times a week, every other day, for about 6 weeks. This is the results of that treatment. My wife noticed an improvement in my behavior in about 3 weeks. I didn't. I thought it was a placebo. I didn't want to admit anything. But if you can see this, my entry score, I was moderately depressed. I didn't know that. After 1 week post 18 treatments, you can see my depression was down next to zero. I went off of the treatment for 18 treatments. You can see that it maintained itself for a little while after a month, but then it started to creep back up. And then I went with a Vielight home device at that point and used that for another 18 treatments. And you can see I went right back down to 0.0. Here's my PTSD. I didn't have any idea I had PTSD. I was never in the service, but I had a pretty high score. After the first treatments, you can see I went down to almost next to zero. Crept back up, went back down after my own home treatments. These were phenomenal to me. I mean, we're talking about not being able to go through a day without panicking, without being anxious, without feeling threatened, high anxiety. And here's something that's causing me to get my life back. My wife was thrilled. You can see that the same pattern was for executive function. This is 2 different measures of executive function. Slide's a little blurry. That's okay. You can see the pattern there. I can remember early on, before I went on this treatment, being in the store, Kmart, just shopping for something very simple. Had to call my wife. I was panicked, almost tears coming down my eyes, trying to figure out what to do. And here with this light, again, I get my life back. This is the same time periods covering the functional connectivity on my scan data. See the far left-hand side, the blue is not good. You can see the improvement along the way. The second to the right, you can see that's after I went off the treatment for 8 weeks. And then I went back on the home treatment, and it's coming back around for increased connectivity. Okay, before I get into this real quick, you can imagine, go back to the last slide. You can imagine where we're at. We've been married for 40-some years at this time. We're surprised when we met with Dr. Stearns. The first question he asked my wife was, why are you still here with him? Because he's normally wives don't stay. But here we go. We've got our life back. My wife has her husband back. And this only after about 18 weeks of treatments. I was excited. And I wanted to share this with everybody when I got back. I met with everybody. I told them my story. I've got a PhD. I'm successful in football. I suffered brain injury. I realized the treatment effects. I've worked out my whole life. My workouts are getting better. I was ready to share this with everybody. But this letter from my wife to Dr. Neza really kind of says it all, where she says, I shudder to think where we would be right now if it weren't for light treatment he received at the VA. And down below it says, it's surprising how apathetic even old football player friends are. Larry's been blown off by men who are clearly struggling with symptoms. So at that point, I was being blown off. People were patting me on the back saying, I'm happy for you. I'm glad for your success, but go away. So I knew at that time I needed validation. I was smart enough to know that I had to validate this beyond just my own anecdotal, even though I had good data. It was just one me. But Dr. Hamlin had this book that came out that had thousands of studies with me, still didn't make a difference. So I eventually hooked up with Dr. Wild at the University of Utah. She's a nationally known neuroscientist, hundreds of publications. She's a director of the CTE, or the Concussion and TBI Center at the University of Utah Medical Center. She was one person who did not blow me off. She was interested. I showed her my data. She was curious. With her support, we raised some money, recruited ex-collision athletes, and started down our path of research. Since then, Dr. Espanenko has joined our team. We've completed, next slide. These are our core research projects. I included the first one in the Boston VA. That's Dr. Nazer's study, but I was the first one in that, Player X. But the other ones we've completed or are in the process of completing now. We've studied the firefighters in Las Vegas. We've studied ex-athletes, ex-collision athletes. We've studied college football players. And we've seen a very direct relationship between the improvements in all aspects of cognitive mental health and changes in the cerebellar activity. We published a little bit, presented at many studies, at many conferences. But over the next 6 months, 3 to 6 months, plethora of many more research projects will come out. And I'm doing this because I'm reminded every day. I've been using this for 5 years now, and it seems like I realize I've lost 25 years of my life. So that's it for me, Peter. That's my journey.
Hey, Larry, thanks so much. That's a great story. Larry, did you want just to quickly comment about the volumetric changes that you saw anecdotally, albeit it's work in progress or not? I'm happy to.
Oh, that's a work in progress. And we were really excited when we saw these changes in the volume of my brain. But realistically, we took those on 2 separate MRI machines. And so to validate those data is just, we're not able to do that yet. But our study for the collision athletes is long-term. We've studied them for 2 and 3 years now. We'll be able to really get a good handle on what's going on in the head. One thing that we might say that we have found significant information with regard to young brains that should be of concern. And we can't share that now, but more is coming.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Larry. I'm sure you're going to have more questions as time goes on. Okay, so now I'm just happy to introduce a world champ, 10x world champ. Cal's coming to you from Calgary. By the way, we've got Miami, Calgary, I'm in California, Lou and Peter and us are in Toronto, so they're covering the North America here. So Cal, we're so grateful to you to spend time. I know you're a really busy trainer, and I know for a fact you're a very academically armed athlete as well. And I'm just really excited to hear your journey. I know Peter's been helping you synthesize what seems to be War and Peace down to 15 minutes. But I wish you luck, and I give you thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be a part of this tremendous webinar and this ongoing project working with PBM. Basically, just give you a little bit of background. I'm an applied kinesiologist, which just simply means that I let the scientists do the scientific clinical work, and I take that data and I apply it usually to myself, to be honest, with my big dreams and goals. And I've been doing this for probably 2 decades. I'm always trying to stay on the cutting edge of ways that we can enhance performance, health, as it encapsulates, so to speak, sleeping patterns, trying to get the best out of our bodies as we relate it to endurance performance. And so I did my master's degree in kinesiology, and I studied under a brilliant man named Dr. David Smith, who at the time was building his knowledge, moving towards working with 27 different Olympic sports at the Canadian Sport Institute. So we had 27 different sports that we were trying to guide along that realm of reaching the best of the best. And when we look at athletes or people trying to become the best of the best, even small marginal gains make a big difference. So if you have 3 or 4 different tools that have just minute performance gains, when you add them all up, that could be the difference between an athlete standing on the podium in a gold medal position or an athlete, of course, placing 4th or 5th. And so our philosophy was to try to seek out tools that we thought would be complementary, beneficial for any athletes. And of course, that really excited me because, as you've heard, I'm very, I guess, adventurous in my own personal athletic prowess, and I've won 10 world Xterra titles. And for those people who don't know what Xterra is, it's a branded multi-sport group or company. And Xterra is triathlon, so it's swimming, biking, and running, but it has a little different feel to it. It's actually, yes, the swim is the same. We swim about a mile, and then we mountain bike. And so there's no road riding, it's mountain biking. So you have to navigate different terrains, roots, rocks, trees, water, mud, you name it, whatever the day gives you. And then after you mountain bike, you actually go onto a trail run. The mountain bike usually is around 2 hours, and the trail run ends up being around an hour. So I've been able to accomplish quite a bit of, I guess, success in the endurance realm. And again, that's my passion. I did my master's degree specifically on that. And one of my biggest accomplishments was back in 2021. I was able to win the World Ironman Age Group Championships. The race was in St. George, Utah, a beautiful state. If you've never been there, it's a must go. And also in the same year, it was 6 weeks later, I won the World Xterra Championships as well. And it's never been done where an athlete has won 2 different multi-sport events in the same season. So I actually thought that that was an incredible feat. And along the way, and most of these accolades that you see here, I was using PBM exclusively as my secret weapon to maintain my level of training quality, critical, my recovery quality, and then ultimately using the device before, after, for sure, of these races, as well as potentially even during. So I'll give you an example of using PBM during the actual events. And then I do want to highlight another endeavor that I did that I'm very proud of, is for those people that are in Scandinavia. It was the World Swim Run World Championships called Utøya, which simply means island to island. And this is an incredible endurance endeavor. It was ranked as the 5th most difficult endurance task or event in the world. And what we would do in the Swedish archipelago, we would navigate 26 islands. And so think of it this way. What we're doing is we're running across an island, diving into the Baltic Sea, swimming to the next island, running across that island. And those distances across the islands are variable. Some were 21 or 13 miles long, and some were only 500 meters long. So when it's all said and done, again, navigating the Swedish archipelago from north to south, we ran 65 kilometers in total and over 10 kilometers of swimming. So from an endurance standpoint, you can sense that, of course, the amount of training and preparation for that event was a tremendous amount of volume, a tremendous amount of strain and stress on the human body. I think some of my peak swim weeks, I was swimming over 20 kilometers in the week. Some of us don't even run that much. So that's a tremendous amount of time in the water. And of course, I was getting up to about 120 kilometers of running per week. And so what I really want to stress here is that as an endurance athlete embarking on these type of goals and dreams, that the amount of training is well beyond what the human body really can tolerate. And so we have to help it achieve its health status and actually potentially recover and then rebound to a higher fitness state, basically. So along my journey, I've worked with a lot of athletes, and in these projects you see on the left side there, some of them are just outstanding accomplishments. For instance, I've had 3 athletes who I've trained that have climbed Mount Everest. And so in that journey, I've had to work and learn a lot about high altitude training stress and how it affects the body. I've worked with athletes that have ran across deserts in the Moroccan desert with the Marathon des Sables. I mean, obviously, Ironman is another common endurance test that we see people from around the world embark on. And incidentally, just recently, we've seen the world women's Ironman record being broken by Lucy Charles Barkley, which is an incredible performance, doing performances that we've never seen before. And many of you are also very aware of this notion of when will we see the sub 2 hour marathon world record be broken? And I suspect we're very close. I think we're only 30 or 32 seconds away from that being broken. And so when we look at trying to reach the ultimate performances for human beings, we're seeing, just as of late, we're seeing tremendous gains in these world-class performances. And I think it's tools like PBM and a few other of these aspects, again, these small marginal gains, that are allowing human beings to basically reach these extraordinary levels of performance. And to give you an example of, there's an event called the Backyard Ultra. I'm not sure if any of you have heard this before, probably not, because it's insane. So a Backyard Ultra endurance test is an event where runners will enter this event, and it's a 6.7 kilometer, usually trail loop. And there's one winner, and everyone else in the race are DNFers, did not finish. And the nature of this race is interesting. So what they do is they have to run 6.7 kilometers under the hour. So if you run this loop in 45 minutes, that means that you have 15 minutes to go back to your area, put your feet up, change your socks, change your shoes, hydrate, eat. But when the bell chimes with 2 minutes before the next hour, you have to be on the start line. And so ultimately, every hour, you have to accomplish 6.7 kilometers of that specific loop. It's the same loop. And it's just a test of endurance. There's no finish line. It's the person who does the most laps is the winner. And I find that extraordinary because most events have a finish line. And in this case, there's no finish line. It's simply you against the rest of the runners. And so I think about endurance in the way that there's no finish line. You ultimately are trying to just beat your competitors. And initially, when this race came out, the winning times were around 48 hours. So they would do this 6.7 kilometers loop 48 times, and that would be the winner. Well, just last year, the winner of this particular race format was 109 hours, which absolutely blows my mind. And as a kinesiologist and scientist, I think of, wow, think of the sleep deprivation that a person would have to overcome. And then I also take it into the world of the central nervous system, because the central nervous system has a central governor, which is trying to protect the body as it's being challenged through, in this case, an endurance performance. At some point in time, the central nervous system is telling the body, I've had enough, we need to shut things down. And this is, again, a theory from Tim Noakes. And I find that PBM, as we relate it to this central nervous system, is an amazing tool for us to start to recalibrate or create more of a healthy environment on the central system for endurance athletes to reach these extraordinary performances. And so, sort of get back to that in a second here. But here, this is my world. I do a lot of biochemical testing, lactate testing. We work in the lab. We've tested the Calgary Flames. We do documentation of of testing, monitoring different biomarkers, heart rate, But lately, again, I've been working a little bit with altitude. And so I kind of put two and two together with altitude. And I think, well, here we are creating an environment or putting our athletes in an environment that's even more stressful and asking them to exercise. So you have a double whammy there, at which we need, again, to enhance our abilities to keep these athletes super healthy. So there's one thing to load an athlete and actually get them to train harder or create more strain and stress on the human body. But we also have to think about how we can actually help and complement their ability to recover and keep their emotions what we consider positive. And so, and I'll get back to the emotional side because I think it's a huge link in this whole process. So yeah, I'm a dinosaur. This is really interesting. So I started using PBM back in 2014. So again, as a master's student, a grad student, we do all the groundwork, those sort of things. And we would be a lot of the guinea pigs in the pilot studies. And one of my colleagues, Paula Jardine, she wrote me this email and says, have you ever heard of this Vielight PBM device? And I said, absolutely not. However, based on the preliminary studies, all of the results that they were reporting checked my boxes. It was like, absolutely, mitochondrial ATP production, blood viscosity in that optimal range, of course, to help with delivery of red blood cells and white blood cells circulating more readily to combat, again, any inflammation, or in this case, it would be viral or bacterial infections, because we found that endurance athletes generally, they have to fight off illness, which is usually an upper respiratory tract infection. And that, of course, will cause inconsistency in their training. So I looked at that email and I said, I've got to have one. And so immediately in 2014, I started incorporating this device on a regular basis in my own personal training. And then we also implemented into a lot of our Olympic athletes and their training sequencing, particularly as we get into heavy loads like blocks of training, mesocycles that are really heavy in the physical strain. We tried to protect their bodies, help them recover, and just generally try to get the most out of the programs. So again, adding up all those small marginal gains, and I don't think PBM is a small marginal gain. I actually think it's a tool that most athletes, I think we will see the trend. Most athletes will be using this again as enhancing their performances and of course, maximizing their recovery. So these are sort of just the bullet points that I've found personally, and as well as working with some of those athletes that you saw earlier, that these are the main benefits. Like my energy levels after I use just the basic PBM device is much higher. My state of flow. So state of flow is basically when you are the athlete and you're potentially in a performance or even a training session. There's no need to overthink anything. Your body and your mind is in complete connection. And generally speaking, the performance of the task is at a greater level. And to give you an idea, as an Xterra athlete, of course, I have to mountain bike quite a bit. And this device that you see in the photo here, this is the Gamma transcranial device that I've been using as of late for the last 2 years or so. And my personal experience with this is that when I use this treatment and then I go ride my normal mountain bike circuit, which is 6 kilometers that has trees, rocks, roots, creeks, just a really technical loop, my ability to get into that state of flow, to process data, to make all those really split-second decisions for an amazing so-called loop performance, like I would time my loops, I found that I was getting a 10% jump in my outcome. My performance times were much faster just by using this in the morning, about an hour before I actually go to my training venue. And furthermore, I'm a drummer. So when you look at using all your appendages independently, recently I've been using this tool to enhance my so-called state of flow in my coordination. And I've been actually drumming much better. And I know this isn't necessarily objective, but I believe that I'm drumming much better. And my ability to do different things on my opposite or so-called non-dominant side has improved immensely. And I'm convinced that PBM, in terms of how it stimulates the different areas of the brain, and in this case, it's a motor coordination, I guess, stimulus that is really helping me, again, process information better, as well as coordinate the motor activation a lot better. So those kind of are my latest ahas about this PBM technology. We all know that the sleeping patterns are better. If an athlete obviously sleeping better throughout the night, higher quality of sleep, that's going to make a huge difference on our ability to recover as well. So, and I talked about the upper respiratory tract infections. I think, again, using the intranasal, I believe that's going to make a big difference for most people to keep infections down. Any ailments that I think enter through the nose are going to be neutralized. And generally, again, it's all about keeping the athlete super healthy. And as I said, the blood viscosity, it tends to be in an optimal range. So therefore, we've got a better, what they call AVO2 difference, which means that the red blood cells are circulating more readily. And of course, sharing that oxygen to all the working muscles and cells. And then ultimately keeping the white blood cells flowing really easily through the body so that, of course, they can neutralize any infections as we go through training cycles. Because again, training cycles typically impair that, again, immunity, so that it's difficult to stay healthy as an athlete that's basically training anywhere between 18 to 24, 25 hours a week. So that pretty much concludes my short sort of called applied use of PBM. I'm excited to start using more devices and incorporate them into different ways of lowering the benefits. So again, if we have endeavors or performances that are lasting long periods of time, 24 hours or multiple days, incorporating these devices on a regular basis, not just necessarily in the morning or even at night, but throughout the actual endurance test to see if we can even get better responses, whether again it's affecting the central nervous system or affecting more of the blood profile, mitochondrial health, and all those different benefits that, again, these scientists have proven in the lab, again, applying it to the real world of an endurance athlete. So I think these devices will be a common household device, not just for athletes, but in generally for maintaining health, quality of sleep, production, processing time, again, warding off depression, anxiety, and all those sort of things. But typically, endurance athletes or athletes are the first guinea pigs that go through these beautiful technologies. And eventually, then after that, they meet mainstream. So that's pretty much my short presentation. Again, I'm loving PBM, and I'm excited to see what the next wave of technology will be, especially for myself as I try to win a few more world titles down the road.
Oh, that's totally awesome, Cal. Thank you so much. I think in terms of what's next, Lou's got a lot of tricks up his sleeve in terms of personalization and, modulating different frequencies in different parts of the brain. Just a quick question for you. You live in Calgary. Do you run to the foot of the mountains that 20 miles before you go up the 4,000 feet just to practice?
Yeah, we're very blessed being in Calgary because it's a 90-minute drive for me to actually get to natural altitude.
Yeah.
I use that technique substantially for most of my world championship performances. And so I would get in the car every 3 days. I would drive 90 minutes to get to Highwood Pass, which is at 2,200 meters or 7,200 feet. And every 3 days, I would spend 2 to 3 hours up there. Either it's mountain biking, trail running, hiking, road riding, whatever it would be, just to get that natural altitude and challenge my body again to increase red blood cell mass, for instance. But when you're asking your body to adapt under extreme situations, which is a coupling of endurance, strain, as well as environmental strain being at altitude, that's where you really need these devices to enhance your recovery. And it works for me. I'm an altitude responder. And so when I go to the race, I know that all my systems are peaked and I'm ready. And then after that, it's more about will and desire for me to try to reach an outcome such as winning. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, let's move over to Gil now. I can see him patiently waiting. But last but not least, that's for sure. We're excited to hear what you have to say, Gil. As I mentioned, Gil, we've talked about endurance, we talked about strength, we talked about recovery, and Gil has been working very much more in the, not exclusively, of course, but in the mental space. And I know, listening to what he's had to say, he has a lot of insights ready for us. So I'll take it away, Gil. Thanks very much.
Well, I'm very happy to be here with people interested in all these topics, that we'll always be looking for answers because the world of sports is a constant movement. If you stay in one place that you're comfortable, then you're going to fall behind. And then you have this explanation, these cliches, that 99%, that 1%, deliver the best for yourself. But the athlete is a priority for us. Because the athlete is the commodity. What can we offer the athlete is up to us. And this is a constant search, finding the method, finding the equipment, finding ways to deliver what their dream is. I'm never going to see an athlete that does bad on purpose. Everybody wants to do well, right? And sports are very traumatic. Once you not able to perform under pressure one time, is a repeat type of thing. But at the same time, every team wants to have somebody who's clutch. And all the components in this mix, the mental aspect, being able to put your head in the right place, being able to use your skills, your ability under pressure, this is what we teach the athlete. That's the ultimate. We're trying here at our sports lab to educate the players, the athletes from a young age to the elite players that have basically the same issue. Everybody wants to perform, everybody wants to do well. And so finding ways for us is where the fun is. We try to answer the question, we try to guide them. And I played sports when I was young, up to high school, and then I left my country. But the intention was never to be a professional athlete, but to stay in the world of sports in a different capacity. And I consider myself very lucky to be able to work with athletes everyday basis. I've done this for a lot of years in South Florida, over 22 years, and trying always to find a new way to add to the traditional way. It doesn't mean that you're not going to train hard because we found something else. It's that you got to combine, you got to add everything. We have to leave our boundaries to go and borrow from other sciences, to change just traditional thinking, because sports is always moving, evolving. A lot of people that came to this lab, and I work with them. Some near their end of their career, some in their prime, and some where they just started. Everybody is so different. That's the beauty of it. And I've been lucky to work with different sports, which is something that I appreciate. Being able to be with a baseball player today, later with an MMA fighter, and also performers from other fields, dancers, work with politicians. You say, well, what do politicians have to do with performance? Well, they do have to talk in front of the audience that makes them comfortable, that is going to have question for them. They have to answer this question. And then there is the debate. And they also have to perform. So for me, everybody's a performer. We all have to perform on a daily basis. Whatever you work in, whatever your job is, you still got to perform. And the only way you're going to perform is when you're able to put it together. It's a sync between mind and systemic. That brain and the systemic area had to do the job. So in our sports lab, what we do is that we define the scope of work, the instruments, the equipment that we will use to benefit the player, aside from the talk that we have every day. So you start opening your mind, looking for technology, looking for ways for the player to find his best, to deliver the best version on repeated basis. You know, we want the player in baseball to go 4 for 4 today, and if he doesn't do well tomorrow, he might go for 4. But we teach him how to see it in a different way, because in 24 hours, you're batting 500. That's not bad. But if he's not educated in the mind, he's going to think that he did so well today, and tomorrow is a disaster. But you're still in a series of 3 games, have another game. So it's perception. We teach the person to see different, to believe before he sees, not needing to see to believe. But to do all this, we need a very healthy mind. The brain is that muscle that we have to educate. And that's why if you read all these instruments, they all have a different application, different ways to help in the search for peak performance. Next slide, please. Now, last year, and this is a great experience, one of my favorite athletes was fighting in UFC MMA, his last fight. He was near retirement. He was going to retire after that fight, no matter what. And I've been working with him for a long, long time. He has gone from a very, very young MMA fighter, but now he's considered an old guy. And throughout the whole journey, we've been together. So I had to find ways for him to look at his best in his last fight. And that's when I reached for Vielight, and then, to answer some questions in photobiomodulation, which I have been researching and all that. And then we started working with him, with this fighter. And I can tell you, his reflexes were much better. His concentration was much better. And I'm just glad that we included for photobiomodulation. But at the same time, it was like I needed a validation. 2 months later, I'm working with an athlete who is at his prime. And he walks around every day 190 pounds, but he fights at 145. So we are within the 8 weeks of training camp. He needs to cut 45 pounds. And 6 weeks had gone by, and he comes and talk to me because I'm working with reflexes. I'm working with coordination, and he comes and says, Gil, I'm dead. I said, what's going on? He said, I'm not sleeping well. The weight cut is killing me. I don't have the energy that I need. And I found the answer. I gave him my MIP. The MIP, the multimodal intranasal photobiomodulation, the little thing, right? Yeah, I said, start using this tonight when you go to bed to relax. Use it in alpha. In the morning, you start using it gamma. Only 3 days later, he comes back to me and says, Gil, God bless you, and God bless the people who make this. I'm feeling better than ever. And I said, well, you're going to use this for the next 2 weeks until you go to the fight, right? And he left Miami, went to another city in Florida where the fight was, in Jacksonville. And he delivered the best performance, I think, that he had in UFC. He fought 5 rounds. He killed, literally, one of the best fighters in UFC. And his stock rose, went up. He comes back to Miami, and he's asking me, Gil, how can I get this? Give me a link. Tell me how much you sell this to me. Because I don't just want to use it. I need it. And he's been away in his country. And since he left, we communicate. He's still using the MIP. He came back to do the last 2 weeks for his next fight, the title fight. And he sent me a picture of his MIP. And now we start using the Neuro 4 with him. We have a version. We had a Neuro 3 that he's been using. But these are the type of athletes that know what is good for them because he's at the top of his game before he started using photobiomodulation. But how can you make somebody who is that good even better? And that's what we've done. So to tell you the truth, the weight cut was controlled with that fight and still not a problem. Energy is there and he's sleeping great. So we have the very, can I say, we're convinced that he's going to become a champion in about 2 weeks because he's feeling phenomenal. We still talk from here at the distance, and photobiomodulation is part of this training camp. And that's one of the athletes. I have another athlete. She's an Olympian, traveled around the world. She's been gone for already a month and a half. Jet lag was killing her. Her energy was down every time, and she was a better fighter, but she just survived. Started using this PBM. Jet lag is not an issue anymore. The weight cut that she does probably twice a month, not a problem. Sleeping well, all the energy, and being away from home a month and a half used to be a problem because she would get lonely and very anxious, start texting me, calling me, and all that. Hasn't been an issue since the last trip about 2 months ago. So these are very, very real cases. And that's why I'm so excited of PBM, because we're talking about turning off the fire. And that's what I would like to do. When there is a problem, you have to have the solution. That's the impression when you come into the lab. Yeah, this is happening. What can you do? And you go straight to something like PBM. You provide an answer, something that the app knows is working because it's the only thing that they did different than before. So they know how much better this is. And I'm excited about PBM because it's not just to be used in sports. It can be used with just about anybody. I use it with myself because it's going to be 3 years since I lost my mom and my dad. They both had dementia. I lost them in a matter of 2 months, but I took care of them when they were very ill for the last 4 years. And then the last 2 years from 2018 to 2020, I couldn't sleep because I've been told by the doctor they're dying. They're in the last phase. So I would go to bed and couldn't hit deep sleep because I was just in my mind thinking, are they going to die tonight? And I couldn't hit deep sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night. I slept maybe minutes, and that happened for a long time. After they died, I didn't recover my good sleep. And I had tried everything. So I started using PBM. And I'm going to tell you, with my MIP, I've been able to sleep better. And with the latest addition, the Vegas, is phenomenal. I hit deep sleep again. And I'm telling you, I had to do this because I don't think I ever going to recover my sleep patterns. I think they're just damaged because it was such a long suffering. And I found an answer in PBM. My idea in this lab, if you can go to the next slide, we're here. We're focusing on this. My son and I, aside from the sports lab, we have a baseball program, which is Dynasty Sports Institute. But the majority are little baseball players. And we're educating them different. And we are introducing PBM. We are sending them here to the lab before they go to the batting cage. And these players are just outstanding. Our academy is new, but has been in finals, has won some tournaments already. And the players that joined us, they see the difference, the family see the difference in everything. Behavior, school, academics are better. And we can tell you that we have put some of the local athletes in the best schools. The ones that don't go pro are going to great schools. So we take care of the academics, we take care of sports performance, but at the end of the day, we want to see happy athletes. You can reach the top, you can reach the top of the mountain, but you got to be happy. I don't care how successful you are, I don't know how much money you make, but you still can be miserable. And so one of the things that we're doing is that we're educating the people that we train with. And when we have the opportunity to work with the young generation, it's even better. It's a challenge. It's two different worlds because when you work with professional athletes, they're already there. They feel that I got everything. You cannot add anything. And especially if they're at the top of the game in their prime. But when you go and you introduce something like PBM that makes a whole lot of difference, they become believers. And truly honest, I don't just use any technology, any equipment that came on the market. On an everyday basis, people find me on Instagram, find the sports lab, and people call. And when I asked about the device, they offer me a device for free, a lot. And when I asked, I said, can you send me some of the scientific research that was done on this? Oh, no, we did a case study. A case study is biased. You're going to sell me whatever you want. If you don't have a research paper, I don't want your instrument. I don't have time for that. And that's why I like PBM. I like all the studies on PBM. Phenomenal. Because the clients are going to ask you, how do you know that this works? And then I share a paper with them. So I think that PBM, like we all have said, has a future. I think the future has arrived. I believe that it's going to be in every training that we provide, little by little, because one of the things is, I can tell you, I pioneer a lot of the stuff here because 20 years ago, when I was talking about all the dimensions in training, I was talking about the mind, I was talking about reflexes, I was talking about visual education. People look at me like, what are you talking about? I don't need that. Now, I have a lot of people trying to compete or trying to duplicate. And for me, it's beautiful because that means that they're showing that what we do is right. So I think that the more information that goes out on PBM, the more education that we put out there, more people are going to start using it because it's safe. Like that. There's no risk. Because I like PMF, but you got to be careful when you use it, when you the story. And it's risky, But PBM is solid in the sense that I feel very comfortable that I'm not putting the player at risk. The athlete is fine. There's no side effects. Easy to use. I think it's wonderful. But
hey, Gil, can I ask you a quick question? On that subject, I remember you talking about TDCS, like electrical stimulation and the comparisons and the do's and don'ts and how you'd use PPM instead.
Oh, definitely. Because, for instance, just to give you an example, MMA fighting gets knocked out. Then you can see on TV, it's a concussion or sometimes even a seizure. And then it's going to come to me, the trainer is going to come and say, look, we need to do something. We need to work with this guy. PEMF it's not the thing to do because of electrical stimulation. That's the last thing that the player needs at that moment, the athlete. But PBM, the stimulation to the red light is safe. And then we can start doing everything to put this athlete back in the field, back to normal. And that's the difference. That I'm very careful with anything that is electrical stimulation. I know there are some good uses, but you have to take into consideration the history of the athlete. And PBM is just safe.
That's great. Gil, thank you so much. We're going to have to end that presentation. That's a great, great story. And we really appreciate the time you've spent and the insights and the time you've taken to generate the insights. Thank you so much. So we have a global audience here still online. We've still got several hundred people online looking to ask questions that are coming in. Austin, do you want to fire us a few of them that you see top of the line there?
Yeah, sure, definitely. And we'll also invite our CEO and founder, Lou Lim, to contribute as we answer these questions. So I'll just go through them and just pick some notable ones here. So Lou, we had a question that said that you said you had never been in the military. Given this, can you tell us how you were able to get treatment through the VA? Would VA treatment for TBI and CTE be available for others?
So I've never been in the military, but we work with people who work with the military, particularly the VA. I think Margaret Nazer is among the audience here. She has been using our device for many years, and Margaret Nazer is the researcher that has treated Larry, and she's actually part of the Boston VA. So in her research team, they worked with, obviously, the VA, the consequences of traumatic brain injury and a bunch of other things like PTSD and so on. So we were fortunate that among the researchers, they did research on the VA and found that they responded well for traumatic brain injury. And I believe the VA has approved the Vielight device for treatment of traumatic brain injury. So I can go on, but now, apart from the obvious thinking that you get a traumatic brain injury from your tours and a bunch of other things, actually military training involved a lot of simulated blast, explosions and rocket launches that's on your shoulders. So that creates very similar kind of brain trauma as football, for example. So in fact, a lot of military people don't realize their performance have been compromised because of all these things. But I say that among the VAs, they do have an accumulation of symptoms. Our device has been tested and it seems to be working. And hopefully we will make some inroads to help with the VAs.
It might be also worth mentioning that Dr. Linda Chow at UCSF in San Francisco is also a VA researcher. She's a neuroradiologist and did some early work at looking at fMRI comparisons and post-war syndrome. There's a publication there if you're interested. And then, of course, Dr. Elizabeth Wild and David Tate from Utah are also both VA researchers. We're very fortunate to have had those people do a lot of the early work with us.
Yeah, apart from TBI, the other work that Margaret Nazer, Linda Chow, and some others have done is to look into Gulf War illness. Those who have been in the Kuwait War and breathed in the burn pits and so on came back with impaired cognition and a bunch of other symptoms. So that's been published, I think, and that's another area that have been explored.
All right. Thanks, Lou. Yeah, we'll try to just get as many questions as we can through. So another question for Lou. Could you speak to any of the key mechanisms of action that we believe are happening that explain the improvements in cognitive processing that Jill discussed and Calvin discussed?
Yeah, the mechanisms behind photobiomodulation is actually very interesting in my mind. If you go and Google photobiomodulation mechanisms, there are a bunch of papers that have come out, and I actually middle of submitting the mechanism behind traumatic brain injury, a manuscript for publication. So there's quite a lot being done. But But when Gil talked about electrical stimulation and magnetic stimulation versus photobiomodulation, so I want to explain why there's a difference. Now, when you send electrical currents to your tissues, your cells, they respond. Your brain responds to electrical signals. So they respond to electrical signals. You do that and measure the EEG. You do see the change. So you do see the brain responding, the brain gets better, and so on. Photobiomodulation also produces the change. But here's the difference. Photobiomodulation actually acts on the cells and make a physiological change. Now, when the light is directed to the cells have mitochondria. Mitochondria have they have the enzyme and the chromophores, receptors for light, make it respond to the red, particularly red and near-infrared light. When the cells are not functioning, particularly not functioning at optimum. So the less optimum the cells are, the more it respond. The more you do this athletic training and stress and competition, you go through this oxidative stress. So your cells are like really off homeostasis, the balance. It responds better. Electrical signals, I believe, do not do the same thing, not to that extent. They cannot explain that the mitochondrial or respiratory chain will respond the same way. So that is the difference. It makes a physiological difference. Now, when you see changes in the physiology, it also means that the light is causing some kind of a effect on your genome. Anytime your protein changes with lasting effect, there is a transcription, the replication of gene going on. So it accounts for a more long-lasting effect, and that has been explained in various studies. So that is the big difference. It responds immediately, and it also has a longer-lasting effect. But I want to make another distinction. When Larry Carr talked about CTE, traumatic brain injury, so he went through a process of CTE, which is neurodegenerative. Now that has caused by, this stickiness, they call it the tau neurofibrillary tangle that's stuck on the small blood vessels, and then it progressively gets worse. That is something that here is where that photobiomodulation may help with a longer lasting, but maybe not forever, because when it comes to neurodegenerative disease, CTE, but particularly for dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, I believe your more fundamental problem is in place, and there is also the genome involved. So that requires you to try to battle or neutralize the effect of your genes, and which means that you may have to use it more regularly. But if you're healthy, I think the effect will last longer. That is a little bit of distinction there.
All right. Thanks, Lou. So another question. So a lot of the people joining this webinar, they're very new to red light therapy. And the question is, I want to ask, what is the difference between the red light LED of Vielight and the LED of a common store-bought light LED? So if you could just talk about, I guess, the difference between LEDs of Vielight versus something you just buy in a store.
Okay, I've got a earlier version of a Euro 4. So it looks a little bit different from the picture. Look at the size of let me put this up and I show you the focus. Okay, you can see the LEDs are pretty big. Okay, say this for example. You cannot buy this off the store, you can stick it on, say, a plate and slap it on the back of a helmet, put it on. Now the difference is this little thing actually has a lot of power. Now we believe that to penetrate in through your hair, your scalp, and everything to your brain, you require a minimum of power density. And now, how do we know that? Okay, apart from anecdotal, observing, we actually have an ongoing study at Baycrest Hospital, which is attached to the University of Toronto, and look at real-time fMRI, the imaging of your brain, and see what the blood flow response is like. And we found that it takes quite a bit of power to actually see the difference in the blood flow, and then it maintains for a while. So we know that power density matters. If you buy a LED off the shelf, it's usually about 22 milliwatts to put into context. And then we are capable of delivering up to 150 milliwatt. So that's a big difference. But we tone it down for safety. Then we do these fancy things like pulsing and so on. But the thing is, why do we design it in such a way? I'm really focused here. The idea is to have contact on your scalp while trying to maintain comfort. Now, why is this important? The further your LED, your light source, is away from your tissue, the less delivered power you're going to have on your skin. And it's a law of physics. It's called the inverse square law of irradiation. And you virtually square the ratios with the distance. So the attenuation is quite drastic. So we try to have the contact, unless you're using a laser, which has safety problem with regulators and so on. When you're using an LED, you really want to have as much contact as possible. Or if you lose some contact, minimize the distance. So we start with higher power design in a form that is have contact, and versus when you're very little power, I think even low power can draw a response. If you go out to the open with some sunlight, you also get a response, but you don't know. Sometimes you don't need fancy device to actually get healthy for your brain. So the argument is, why don't you just go to the sun? Yeah. But that's why we want to make it different. We want to use it at your convenience at the time of your choosing, plus actually more. The red and the infrared, we call it action spectrum within this wavelength. You will get a response from your cells. So that is part of the reason why this is done this way. And also we pulse it. I will come to that later. Now we do tinker around. We want to explore. Okay, what's the effect? We pulse it. You use 10 Hz alpha, 40 Hz gamma. We actually see different response. We do EEG work as well, and going through. At the moment, we have quite a lot of experiments going on in our lab to see what the response is. I'm hoping that as we go on, we get become better at doing this and get it more personalized. And I think we have to incorporate artificial intelligence to get it done. But that's for the future. We have what we have right now. It's not perfect, but if it works, that's okay.
All right. Great. Thanks, Lou. Another question. This question is for both Larry and Lou about upcoming research. What can we expect to see in terms of the overall balance of 2024 in terms of research to be coming out?
We've got an exciting future. We've got, like I say, several papers in the queue that will be coming out shortly that will identify cognitive changes, emotional changes across age levels, across sports, across a wide range of situations. But those were pilot studies. I mean, we have several studies being planned, going through the IRB process, that will look at mild or moderate to severe TBI, look at NFL and NCAA football players specifically, veterans, hopefully soccer players, women's soccer players especially. These studies will be more rigorous protocol-wise, so that if we can get the similar results that we've gotten so far, it's going to be really exciting.
Do you want to just cover the future of personalization a little bit, and what that's kind of the market side of, on the product side, the future of research at Vielight, of what you can actually reveal to this audience?
Everybody's brain is different. And we really learned that in our ongoing research. The work is not published yet. At the moment we have it, we actually analyze data on high-level meditators. And we learned quite a number of things. I mean, these guys' brains are not just normal. I think they're a little bit kind of super normal. And they show characteristics. But what we learned from them is that we induce a certain frequency, and thought, okay, if we induce, take for example, 40 Hz gamma, we expect to see gamma all lit up. But actually, we don't. We have expression of high gamma from 10 hertz, 20, whatever it is. But they do behave differently because they already walk around with high gamma in the brain. So maybe that's different. So now we're going to do on just normal, healthy people and see what it is. But I'm very confident that everybody's brain is different. When it works with our presence specifications like 10 hertz, 40 hertz at a certain time, I would say that it works on a lot of people, but not everybody the same way. So maybe we're talking about 70% this way and the other 20, either they work less or maybe none. We have to accept that maybe it is possible. So we have to keep doing experiments, but how do we cater for different brains? Your brain behave differently, different days, different time of the day. So now we're working through experiments to see that, okay, for this particular person, I say we want to build high level of gamma in the brain, and we may have to go through this loop, right? We run through this sweep, and we have a device called a NeuroPro. And Austin here is kind of managing that whole project of NeuroPro. He's developing a community. Very interesting stories come out of it. But the NeuroPro allows you to program different frequencies. Which one is going to pulse at this? Which one's going to pulse at that? How to connect them? But you run through this cycle. Okay, for this particular person, by doing it this particular sweep, he's building up his native, say, gamma in the brain. And we go through the process over time, and then maybe he is developing that.
Well, thanks a lot, Lou. That was a great timing because the clock just reached the end of our 1.5 hour segment. And I think everybody's ready for some coffee or tea or cocoa, whichever time zone you're on. So thank you so much. Now, just remember, everybody, if you have any specific questions, you can fire them into info@vielight.com. Or you can reach out. Obviously we have the mailing list, and we will send you all an email afterwards. So we will sequester your specific questions, try to collect them. And of course, we will be emailing a recording of the webinar. I just want to say once again, this was more than I expected from the presenters. Thank you so much for your insights, your brilliance. And thanks, Lou. So I wish you all a good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And we'll be in touch soon telling you about the next Vielight Expert series, which is either going to be on creativity from some research out of Spain. Believe it or not, creativity is measured. Or it's going to be on autism with some work that's come out of Italy from Dr. Polento. Thank you very much and goodbye. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. For those who submitted Q&A questions that didn't get answered, we'll try our very best to answer those and have those distributed as well.